Michael Ringel, thank you so much for joining us on Longevity Dialogues. This is our first episode, and I think we've set the bar very, very high. It's going to be difficult to continue with guests of your caliber. I think I'll hand it over to you to give a little bit of a background on yourself, if you don't mind. Did young Michael have any particular interests or anything unusual that we should know about as he was making his way through school and life?
Yeah, thanks so much, Martin, for having me. It's really a pleasure. You're such a wonderful, driver of this whole space. I'm proud to call you a friend and colleague, and really excited to be on this kind of premiere episode. Yeah, so I mean, my kind of professional introduction, right? Biologist by training. I've just joined Life Biosciences as Chief Operating Officer. I came to that from, most recently, I was a senior partner and managing director at BCG, Boston Consulting Group, where I was for just over 25 years. And, what happened was I did a project in 2019, which I can talk about because it was a public tender. So then for government entity that was interested in this aging space. Should they get involved? Was there anything real about it? And if they were to get involved, could they help? And we did that project. It resulted in the formation of Evolution Foundation, which is now the largest foundation supporting both research grants as well as investments for health span science. Wonderful organization. I have a small ongoing affiliation, which is I'm on the board of the U.S. Evolution Foundation. And, as part of that work, I did a real scan of the landscape, right? Is there anything real here? I became convinced there's actually tremendous potential to modulate a whole host of diseases through modulating the rate of aging. Since many of those diseases are age-related, if you can change biological age, you can change the incidence of lots of diseases. And also became convinced that there was some really good technology around that. Obviously, I voted with my feet on which one I like best, which is partial epigenetic reprogramming, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about. But to your question, it starts from a very early age. My father knew about caloric restriction, which is probably still the best thing you can do. Eat healthy, not too much, plant-based diet. Obviously, don't get underweight. But, keeping your weight in that normal range, is really valuable for health. And, there were experiments done in the 30s, well before I was born, right, in the 70s. To show that was one of the most profound interventions you could do across a whole range of different animals. And so he told me about that, and that's probably where I got my first spark of interest in the space.
And so you're in college, you go through the hard sciences in college, right? Had you an eye on the aging research space at that time, or what did it look like?
So I did biology for undergrad in the U.S. at Princeton, and I did biology for postgrad in the U.K. at Imperial. And I was doing work on diapause. Why does diapause, which is this sort of quiescent state that animals and many insects will go into during adverse conditions? And it was about that time that Cynthia Kenyon published her work on DAF2 in worms. One of the first, DAF2, H1, were really the first genes that were identified where you could do a single gene mutation and extend lifespan in an animal. In this case, something like a 50% lifespan extension from a single gene knockout. So, pretty profound effect. Those are diapause genes. And of course, many of the genes that have been identified since then are in this kind of general nutrient sensing, environment sensing pathway, kind of both upstream and downstream of DAF2 and H1. And that's not an accident. I mean, they're really tapping into the same pathway of caloric restriction. And there's a reason why diapause evolves. When conditions are so bad that it doesn't make sense to reproduce, because it's the middle of a famine, and unfortunately, offspring would probably just die anyway. There should be selection pressure to shift that energy and resources that you would have put into reproduction and to kind of extending, waiting one more season for a better season, and trying again, the following year. And, a side effect of that is you're stretching and waiting that extra season means you live longer. So mice under caloric restriction or with some of these, gene modifications can live 50% longer, one extra year rather than 2 years, will live 3. And that could be the difference between, a famine year and a year surplus.
Yeah. So we'll come back to that because I want to talk to you later about theories of aging, which I've heard you speak really deeply and really intelligently about. But I just want to, for I suppose people coming to this space, relatively recently, which would be the majority because it has grown so much. My memory of, we'd say, 2010 or so was that aging research was almost a radical thing for an academic to suggest they were doing. So is this something you saw? When do you think there was a transition from that? Is there a long way to go to continue that transition? And how do you think it has occurred, and how do we accelerate it into the future? The acceptance of this as an academic pursuit?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And, it's thanks to work of folks like yourself and others that ultimately getting data-driven messages out persuades folks. So there was some activity in the mid-2000s that started to bring it into the mainstream. It's not that, the sort of first genes were identified only in the mid, it's not that long after it started to become actionable that it really started to hit, an academic interest. And of course, it flows downstream from there. Once academics identify some targets, then biotechs can start working on them. And ultimately, pharmaceutical companies can pick that up. There's been a number of linchpin moments. Quite an important recent one are the GLP-1 analogs. So your Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, that have been so incredible in terms of helping patients with diabetes or obesity manage these conditions, which of course drive a tremendous burden of healthcare costs for themselves personally and society at large. And people, were initially surprised that they're not only helping with these conditions, but that they're now proven to help with other conditions like heart failure, like chronic kidney disease. There's emerging evidence and ongoing clinical trials to ascertain whether they also help with things like neurodegeneration, that's, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, et cetera. Many cancers appear to be related to obesity, and are they having an effect there as well as, a host of other areas. And this was sort of surprising to people who have a mindset of, one pathway can only affect one disease. But the core of aging biology, what we've figured out is that there are trigger points that adjust the overall rate of aging. And because so many diseases are age-related, if you're able to adjust those, then you can affect the incidence rate of many diseases simultaneously and really create a pipeline in a pill. And that's incredibly valuable for society, but also for the pharmaceutical companies. And they've certainly taken notice of the kinds of, we're talking maybe $100 billion market from these GLP-1 analogs and incretins more broadly. The public health benefit coupled with the chance to make real financial returns, I think, has gotten the industry finally excited. We still got a ways to go, but we've reached a real turning point.
Do you think in that ways to go portion, Michael, we're treading into kind of, difficult water here, but the psychology of an audience that's really happy to think of, if I can find a way to cure your back pain, or if I can cure your heart disease, or if I could stop you getting Alzheimer's, or if I could, all of those things individually are great, right? But to do that, in a one-size-fits-all anti-aging drug frightens people still. There's still a sense of kind of recoiling at the notion of resisting aging. So those two things, which seem to be the exact same thing phrased differently, how is the psychology of that? Have you found that to be a problem? And how do you think we overcome that, understanding all the caveats of what promise and hype and everything else that's within that realm?
Yeah, I think there's a pretty good system already set up for approval of medicines. It is based on individual indications, right? So, and there's a reason for that. You want to show evidence. You sort of know generally already the medicine is safe if it's, similar dosing, similar patient population, et cetera. But you also want to be able to show efficacy. in a that it is able to do what you claim in terms of ameliorating or slowing progression or whatever it is for a given disease. And you do have to test that step by step with each disease. And I think that's actually the right way to do it. The sort of incredibly positive aspect, though, is that you can do that with one medication where you already understand, A, it's likely to be safe because it's already proven safe in another indication. And if you understand the geroscience hypothesis, it also increases your estimate of the probability of success in these other indications as well. And, you've also done a lot of the work that needs to be done in terms of just manufacturing, all the kinds of other things, distribution that go into being able to produce and sell a medicine like this. And so the pipeline and pill message, I think, is the right one to convey this. It's mixed, right? You do need still individual approvals, but that's going to be easier to do when you're using a geroscience agent that is likely to work across multiple indications.
Yeah, but trying to get back into the controversial part, or the difficult part, if we suggested, less than 1% of healthcare budget is spent on aging research itself. So if we want to up that and we accept that would require a greater buy-in from the public, how do we cross the bridge of telling people that ultimately, you want to stay well. You don't want to be sick next Monday or the Monday after. And that an easier route to fending a lot of these diseases is to tackle the degenerative aging process itself. Yes, there's still kind of a recoil to that. So how do you found?
Look, there's a number of arguments here, right? I mean, there are moral arguments that some people believe very deeply, right? Life has value, more time with loved ones, more time to learn new things, more time to do the things that you care about.
Yeah.
Individually. And then more broadly, more time for all of us to benefit from that. A great physician who's able to continue doing surgery for another decade. Imagine Einstein, being productive for another 20 years, what that means for society. There's sort of, I think, a very strong moral imperative. Of course, that depends on your own value judgments and how you weigh these things. But we have historically seen, extending lifespan with health, right? No one's talking about an extended period of decrepitude, but extending lifespan with health, or even just extending health span without a lifespan extension, which also matters, right? We kind of have a decade where we're in very poor health at end of life. And if we can ameliorate that, it's also incredibly valuable. I think most people understand there's value in that, but you do need people to, carry the torch on getting a message out there, which I think is, why roles like yours are so important. There's also a really strong economic argument, and this matters to people as individuals, but also governments who help set policy. I think there's this sort of misapprehension that, living longer is going to cost us money. And it's because we have in our heads, old people that are, not productive, they're pulling down, healthcare costs out of the system, et cetera. And this is this sort of impending gray wave that people have been talking about for a while that are going to really hurt the budgets of governments. How do we pay for all these entitlements with an ever shrinking working population? But in fact, longevity science is the answer to the gray wave, and a lot of serious economists who looked at this. Murphy and Topol at University of Chicago wrote a National Bureau of Economics research paper. Dana Goldman, working at Rand Corporation, most recently Andrew Scott at London Business School. And they all looked at this and found really billions of dollars, trillions of dollars of value, depending on which assumptions you make, that bolstering the economy. And the reason for that is threefold. I mean, one is they do put a dollar value on life, which is always a bit hard to do, but there's some value to it. So that's one aspect that they calculate. But the second are real dollars. If people are able to be productive longer, that means they're working longer. That means they're spending money as consumers longer. That drives GDP. So that's the second element. And the third is you are delaying and probably shortening the period of time in which people need to draw down entitlements like healthcare or Social Security or pension benefits. And that also has real dollar value. And so each of us kind of thinking about the economics of the kind of country or society we want to live in, as well as our governments thinking about the economics that they can support, there's a real strong argument for why this is an area that should be supported with increased research.
Okay, I couldn't agree more. If we accept, I guess, that the aim isn't going to be limited to, I would like you to have 6 extra months of morbidity, and we will continue to progress. We don't have to get bogged down in projections or anything like that, because that's problematic. But we clearly want to stay well as long as we possibly can, and our medicine and our efforts and our intelligence will go along that lines. So tell me why reprogramming is such a useful route down that particular journey.
Yeah, so I mean, there's both theoretical reasons and then empirical reasons. So maybe I'll start with theoretical. The pathways of aging biology are tapping into some existing biology in order for it to work. So we already talked about why caloric restriction works. This sort of, it makes sense to be able to stretch when you're in a tough period.
So sorry, Michael, to interrupt, but just to take that to the innocent ones, or to the people that are as unfamiliar with this as possible. Like, if you go back to the very kind of basic explanation of what caloric restriction is and why it works, and then what epigenetic reprogramming is, and it's linked to us having babies and so on, and how that might work.
Sure, yeah, for sure. So one aspect of our biology is what I talked about earlier, in this discussion, where if there are bad conditions like a famine, it makes sense for an organism to try to stretch and wait for a better time. And there are built-in mechanisms, plasticity, that allow organisms to do this. And we can tap into that by caloric restriction, sort of reducing the amount that, let's say, a worm or a mouse or whatever eats, it will live longer. And there are medicines that can do this as well, through various ways of tapping into that pathway, proven with animals, and emerging evidence that they may have at least health benefits in humans. Things like the GLP-1s, these weight loss drugs. That's one kind of biology that exists within us that you can tap into with medicine. But there's another incredibly powerful biology built within us, which is the fact that we make babies from our old cells. A 35-year-old woman has a newborn, even a 80-year-old male. Like, there's Mick Jagger and other examples of quite old males. No matter the age of the parent, the baby is born young, and that's sort of a startling feature of biology the more you think about it. And this was tapped into already by Shin Yamanaka, who won the Nobel Prize in 2012, who does what's called epigenetic reprogramming. You take a cell back to pluripotency. So any cell, skin cell, you can treat it with just 4 Yamanaka factors, the discoverer, and you take that cell back to what's called a pluripotent stem cell. It can be any kind of cell. And if you grow a clone from that cell, it's born as a baby. So many people remember Dolly the sheep. Dolly's sheep came from an adult.
Just about remember it, Michael.
Cloned, yeah, it's a while ago now, but cloned and born as a baby and grew them to adulthood. And we now know you can do this over and over again. So you grow a clone to adulthood, take a skin cell from that clone, take that cell back to being a stem cell, grow a new clone from it, over and over again, at least a dozen times in mice. There's biology built within us that makes babies young, and we can already tap into that to make cells completely rejuvenated over and over again. Now, the problem is, when we do that right now, you also erase the identity. So you take that skin cell or nerve cell or muscle cell, whatever it was, and you're making it a pluripotent cell. It has no identity. It can grow from that back into nerve cells and muscle cells and so on. But at that stage, it's like a blank slate. You couldn't do that to your own body, because you want your nerve cells to stay nerve cells and your muscle cells to stay muscle cells. You would cease to function properly. And the insight that was published in Nature in 2020, it was on the cover, out of work at Harvard in the Sinclair lab, is that you don't have to go all the way back. If you just treat with 3 of the 4 Yamanaka factors, you never go all the way back. Cells stay the same identity. Muscle cells stay muscle cells, nerve cells stay nerve cells, etc. But you do, to some degree, de-age the cell. And that becomes a single intervention point that allows you to rejuvenate all kinds of cells. And of course, that means you can use it in all kinds of diseases that are age-related. So my company, Biosciences, has licensed that technology out of Harvard, and we're working on using this technology to address a number of age-related diseases. We're starting with optic neuropathies for the first disease, and there's a glaucoma many people know of. It's progressive eye disease, second leading cause of blindness in the world. There's another kind of rare condition, similar, called NION, non-arteritic interior ischemic optic neuropathy. It's basically a stroke that affects the optic nerve, again, age-related. We have good evidence that we can restore some visual function, cure blindness in a way, in animal models. And we're on the cusp of testing this in humans. We should be in clinical trials within a year.
I mean, that's astounding. The concept is astounding. So again, if I'm brand new to this and I'm trying to figure out what is all this talk about longevity, aging, can we actually do anything about it? I might look at that and say, well, why don't I just swim in a bath of active factors and immediately turn back to my 20-year-old self? So what are the challenges between where we are and where we'd like to go with that, and the translation, or we'll say, even the spreading it to the whole body, delivery systems? What are some of the key challenges there?
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. First of all, you wouldn't want to swim in a bath of all the almanac factors, because
Or treat them even.
you really don't want to induce pluripotency, have your cells lose function. It can lead to cancer. There's all sorts of risks there. And of course, we're being very prudent in taking a stepwise approach to ensure that 3 of the Yamanaka factors, never has that risk. Again, so far in the animal models, that's what we've seen, but we want to take a stepwise approach. Even with that, though, as you pointed out, delivery is difficult. These are not, we're sort of used to swallowing a pill and having that go to all our cells. These are, large molecules that you can't get into your cells that way. And so you need other ways to get them in. And that's a challenge, even, for all drugs. So how do we take some of these large molecules and get them targeted to the organs that we want to get them to? It's part of the reason why we're starting with the eye, because it's accessible. You can actually, some people may be squeamish by this, but you can inject directly into the eye and get it right to where you want it to go. There's a few other organs where that's relatively easy: skin, liver, etc. But there are others where it's hard to get the distribution equal across all organs, if you were talking about something where you're trying to do it to the whole body. And so there's a long way to go before we're at the stage of, could you holistically rejuvenate, across cells? That's a long-term vision of where we can go. But in the meantime, there's also a lot of individual age-related diseases that we can knock off one by one.
It's interesting, though, that it's theoretically possible, right? Even if some distance away.
It's theoretically possible. So the evidence currently is limited. There's evidence, actually not us. Another company took our OSK treatment. Those are the 3 Yamanaka factors, and injected it into old mice, just systemically, trying to get to every organ, knowing that they'll get to some organs more than others, and the dose is going to be a little bit kind of low in its entirety. But they published that they saw a lifespan increase. They injected it into old mice, and for the remaining part of their lifespan, those mice lived an extra 109%. Now, it's one experiment, one company. It's mice. Mice are not humans. It's very old mice, so the percentage extension, I would kind of have a caveat around how you think about what it could do. But it's at least a little bit of proof that there may be something there that, of course, we would need to follow up with a lot more hard science to really ensure.
And I understand that you need to be careful what you say, and that it's early days, though, when you consider having any success in that field. It does bring me to a question that, if you don't answer this question out of prudence, I understand entirely, but even for me to talk about it, the question within the field as a whole, on the over-promising, under-delivering versus the kind of hyping down the field so much, when for many people it's still a very novel approach. So I don't know if you have an opinion on the way the field sets itself up at the moment. Is there some people who make outlandish promises and snake oil, etc., and other people who make their role seems to be to highlight that, but in so doing, speak that you can only really discuss what is already proven. And while you, in one context, yes, of course, you can only discuss what is proven. It's also kind of, as I said, a bit like the Wright brothers saying we have flown 109 feet, but we're never going to fly any further. So to allow for the probabilistic developments and how we build caution around this so that we're not misquoted and someone says this person said, oh, we can live to 2,000 years, the other person said. But we need to give people some degree of realistic hope about the future, because there isn't, I don't think, a saturation point on hope and excitement in this yet. I think for those in the community, it seems to have grown quite a lot recently. But for the world at large, this is still a very small concept, the idea of bringing aging under control in any respect. So where do you feel the field falls in that? And where do you see yourself? Is it cautious optimism, or how do you...
So for each of us as consumers listening to lots of messages, and of course we have our day jobs, if we're not working in longevity, where you've got to pay attention to, and there's, a million other policy things to be thinking about. It can't be misleading when you hear someone make claims that are not supported by evidence around a given supplement or various other regimen, including claims around immortality, which is not physically possible.
Of course,
like this. Sometimes those statements, I think, are well intentioned. The people believe it, and I think every field has some visionary / crackpot, which is okay. There are also some people who are doing it because there's an economic incentive, like you say, around snake oil, trying to, build a business that is not founded on evidence-based medicine. It's definitely not the approach we're taking, right? We're following evidence-based medicine, FDA approval, EMA approval, and various regulatory authorities that approve medicines is the way that Life Bio is approaching things. We do have an eye towards the long-term promise, which we already talked about in terms of cellular rejuvenation could have the potential for benefits beyond kind of, individual single age-related disease amelioration. But even that first message around, we think there's a lot of individual age-related diseases we think we can ameliorate, sometimes stop the progression of, maybe sometimes reverse. We'll see. We'll have to be data-driven around that. But even that message is incredible. And so that's where we're focused for now.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that entirely. And Life Biosciences and you are certainly not the target of what I'm discussing there. I think, in fact, having someone like you in the field helps, because, people that watch this can go and watch other talks by you and look at your own background and pedigree, and you need to trust people, and I think you're someone that everyone will easily trust, and what you'll say is very careful and well thought through. So, and that really matters, because we're adjacent to an industry called the anti-aging industry, which is based on skincare, and in that field you can say whatever you want, really, and nobody holds you to the standard of, well, that's not true. Everyone accepts that there's a degree of salesmanship, and, we'll pay a huge amount of money for a face cream that doesn't work, happily. There is the risk, certainly, of charlatans, of hype, of exaggerations, but I think there's also a counter risk of people not being excited enough, and not then investing with their interests in you studying this when they're in college, or their investment dollars, or because, I think you and I both, and many other people, feel confident that this is, however we frame it, this will be the biggest industry possibly in the 21st century.
There's no question, right? If you just take Andrew Scott's projection, which is actually no lifespan effect. Yeah. So, 0 extra years of life added. But if you're able to add just 10 years of health span, the number there was more than 300 trillion, $367 trillion. That's an enormous amount of value available here. It is. For people to kind of understand in context, the GDP of the world in 1 year is about 100 trillion. So we're talking about something that's worth 3 times the entire GDP of the world
over a 10-year period. Yeah.
Exactly. You see that, you realize, again, some of that value is just in the intrinsic value of longer life, but some of that is economic dollars that any company that's able to produce agents that make that feasible, some of that, gain goes to society, but some of it will go to the producers. And there's a tremendous economic opportunity for companies to engage on this. And again, the GLP-1s, I think, have kind of opened the eyes of the industry of just how much value there is in prevention, which is really, really valuable.
So if we were to grant Michael Ringel king of the world for a couple of days, where you can pull together all the different aspects of society with the sole goal of achieving increased health span, stroke lifespan into the future, what would be the key things you would try to do to accelerate the progress of this? And this is a hypothetical, Michael, so you can do whatever you want.
Thank goodness it'll never be true. I don't think anyone should be.
Well, I can think of people slightly worse than me as well.
Lost behind me. But I think one of the biggest things actually is just getting the message out. Because once everyone understands the value and the opportunity, then collectively we'll work together to make it happen. It's amazing what. We're a social species that has been able to do the most amazing things, and it's because we work together, right? And we build on the successes of our ancestors. And so I sort of believe, and I think this is where your philosophy is focused as well, just getting enough people to understand what's at stake here. There's then enough pressure from the grassroots that policies fall in place, industries follow. And so my king of the world would actually be just something simple, which is make sure folks are aware enough of what's possible here that then they'll sort it out, the kind of support that is needed for the field. And I do think there's quite a lot of precedent of this kind of mindset change happening. What we saw with cancer, with the campaign that Mary Lasker conducted. This is before our time, but so it's a little bit of a history lesson. At least in the U.S., up until the 40s, cancer was a really taboo subject, not talked about. And you can look at there's some opinion poll surveys and so on. That are you willing even to talk to your doctor about it? No. And Mary Lasker, her husband, the Lasker Prize is named after. Really ran a campaign to change public perception around this. And you can see it shifting in the 50s and then really by the 60s, majority opinion had flipped. More people were worried about it and openly talking about it than were not. Really the reverse of what had been the case. And that led to the fact that there was public attention on it, led to, in the U.S., congressional action, the War on Cancer, the National Cancer Act of 1971. That provided billions of dollars in funding for the National Institutes of Health, which gave grants to scientists. And then you can see tracking after this in the 70s and 80s, a real explosion in the number of publications, which is a proxy for the amount of research being done on cancer. And by so we had, something like 30 medicines on market as, companies got founded and, ideas were brought to market. And we're even at the point now where, of course, cancer is still a killer and something we need to continue to put attention on, but mortality rates are finally coming down. And so the ability to kind of a movement that starts with just awareness and interest, and then drives policy action, with them drives investment, and both in the government sector and then eventually in the private sector, I think is the same kind of thing that we want to recapitulate here. And it starts with the things you're doing around building awareness.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic kind of representation of what might happen. And there's a lot of similarities because it feels like, the degeneration of aging is not going to be simply and easily solved and is maybe decades away and requires just getting a slightly better handle on it each time. And there are some people who are, cancer-free now that are the recipients of the benefits of the work that has gone on, but nobody's going to come out and say we have cured cancer. But I guess one thing I would kind of wonder what you feel about in terms of the challenges, the additional challenges of bringing people on board with aspiration here is that you don't really have patient advocates like you do in cancer. There's a very obvious image and emotional charge. And yes, if you go into a geriatric ward in a hospital, that is also, a really unpleasant experience, and that people in great pain and suffering and multiple things going wrong at the same time, maybe dementia, maybe physical ailments, etc. But we're not ready to treat those as patient advocates just yet, I don't think.
But I think it's, I mean, all of us, have aging as a disease, whether you call it a disease or not. Like all of us suffer from the consequences of it, and it's really in all our interest, not just personally, but then to see the effects on the loved ones around us. Is something that I think if we could ameliorate. And again, we're not talking immortality. We're still mortal, but if you can,
of course,
alleviate that suffering and stretch the period of time when you are in good health, there's, I believe, personally, tremendous value.
Michael, I think we're coming up on time. That's a superb conclusion of kind of aspiration, but it's been a pleasure talking to you. It's nice to see the hope for the future, but grounded in someone who knows what they're talking about and has the scientific background and credibility to do so. So thank you very much for your time, Michael. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please do subscribe to the channel. You can follow, rate us. You can also add comments so that we can engage in a conversation from here. Stay tuned to all of our social media notifications as we give you more updates about the Longevity Summit Dublin and about the podcast itself. Until next time.